So is water. So those are two easy ones. Phosphorus, one of Chan PS, right, mainly circulates as phosphate. If you don't know that PO4 negative is phosphate, just write the word phosphate. You don't have to know the chemical compound. You just don't, okay? It helps if you're going to animate phosphate because you know it's 1 P and 4 O's. So it could be like a head with 4 lines. I mean, whatever you want it to be if you're going to create it. Here's the unique thing about phosphorus or phosphate. It never, ever travels. If you look at this diagram, where do you think phosphate never goes to? Look at the arrows of phosphate being recycled. Where does it not travel through?
It never goes up to the atmosphere.
Correct.
That's crazy.
Phosphate only travels through lithosphere, hydrosphere, and biosphere. It never travels through the atmosphere. It's mainly stored in rocks, in the geosphere. So let's say rocks, soil. It's mainly stored in the geosphere, mainly stored in rocks, and it's high in fertilizer, okay? If you're going to choose phosphate as your cycle, you're going to start with rocks. Best place to start.
All right.
If you start in rocks, this is what's going to happen. So there's my rock. What's happening to it?
It's breaking down.
It's breaking down. Rocks break down. What's breaking it down? Look at the rain.
The rain.
Rain breaks down. I'm going to say weather because it's wind. You see the wind circulating? And rain break down rock. And then the phosphate enters the soil or the hydrosphere. Okay? So it's going to enter. Let's put soil. Let's change it from soil. Okay? Or the water. Once it's in the soil, so now we're here. So you had a rock. Let's say you're creating an animation. You have wind as your background, rain as your background, and a little piece of rock breaks up and turns phosphate in the soil. And then who's going to take in the phosphate?
The animals.
Plants, then the animals. It's always plants first, okay? Because they just can. We can't like absorb phosphate. We eat our phosphate, right? So plants take it in. The food chain begins. Organisms eat the plant. And then if an organism dies or excretes waste, so you're going to have your rock, your wind, your water, phosphate goes into the soil. It goes up to the plant. An animal eats the plant. An animal excretes waste or flips over and dies. And then what's going to happen next? What always happens when an organism dies? Good. Decomposers break down the phosphate and it goes right back in the cycle. You're done. Sulfur mainly circulates as sulfate. Write the word sulfate if you don't know what SO4 is. Write it next to it. It cycles through all layers of Earth, which is hydrosphere, atmosphere, lithosphere, and living things. But like phosphorus, it's mainly found in the geosphere. Same thing, soil and rocks. And then it's also found in fossil fuels. And that's important to know because if you choose the sulfur cycle, you have to give me 2 ways sulfur enters the atmosphere. Look at this diagram. How does sulfur enter the atmosphere? Smoke from what? Volcanic eruptions. And then fossil fuels burning. So we have 2 ways right there, okay? Sulfur enters the atmosphere through fossil fuel burning, volcanic eruptions, and obviously decomposition, which we're going to talk about in a minute. So, here's what happens when sulfur in the soil is available. Who's going to take it in? Plants. So sulfate is taken in by plants in the soil, and then what happens? Same thing as phosphorus. Good. Food chain begins. Then what happens? Then they die. Same thing, or excrete waste, and then decomposers return it to the soil. Okay? Now, if the decomposer returns it to the atmosphere, or we burn fossil fuels, or a volcanic eruption occurs, and phosphate goes into the atmosphere, you don't have to know this. Scratch this out. Forget about its release as sulfur dioxide, and add, it comes back down as acid rain. Write that down. So when sulfate, we're just going to stick to sulfate, okay? gets released into the atmosphere. It reacts with water, so plus H2O. I'll make you a little diagram here. And then it comes back down in the rain as acid rain. Have you ever heard of acid rain?
Yeah.
That's what causes it, okay? I'm done for today.